donk, donk, donk. Straight wheel. Good afternoon, Cycle 4 lifers. How's it going? It's been a while since I made a video. I was doing some other stuff with work, and it's winter time, tire season's off, race season's off. I've been doing some contract work for a dealership out in the central Ohio area, not central Ohio, north of Akron area, and good people. I really like working with those guys. They're helping me out and giving me plenty of work and giving me an opportunity to serve. So I've been busy doing the day job thing again, and waiting for spring to roll around and hit the road again. So what's today's video about? Why did we open up all this floor space in the Mize Mobile Secret Laboratory? There's plenty to do this winter. I haven't ridden this KX250 enough. It's working great. Check my YouTube video out on the full refurbishment of that bike. It's working perfectly well, but I haven't had time to ride it. The R6 is doing good. She earned a V8 national title. That's a strange story. The bike earned the title. I didn't earn it as a rider, and we'll get to that in another video. But the bike earned a national title. She did her job perfectly and flawlessly. So this year we're going to put some valve springs in her. These valve springs got almost 50,000 miles on them, and we're going to do some rod bearings. You know, after 50,000 miles on that street motor, it's time for springs and bearings and some rings. So we're going to do that. We'll do some videos on that. What's all this stuff laying on the bench today? Electrical stuff. So we're going to take this 4-gauge wire, and this is going to be the run wire from the battery isolator that we installed in another video, and we're going to run this wire back to the house batteries in the back of the truck. Okay, so here's the battery cable feed. Now, how did I get this 4-gauge wire, and why does it have that stripe on it? I'll tell you why. To go to West Marine or some of these other 12-volt supply houses and buy cable this thick, look how thick that Mama Jama is. It's extremely expensive. Home Depot doesn't sell it. The thickest thing you're going to get at a normal department store is like that, okay? That's zip cord from the people that make the rig runners. But you're not going to get cable this thick, okay? You're not going to find it. So how do you get it? Well, what I did was I bought a 20-foot length of 4-gauge jumper cables. And I cut the ends of the cables off, okay? And then I split the wire down the middle. And by splitting the black and the red, I wound up with 20 feet of 4-gauge red wire for, I think it was $34. I now have 2 sections of this because I could use the black side too. The black side's ready to go also. What you want to be careful about if you do that is watch how you split the cable. Okay, you want to be very careful cutting along that seam. You don't want to have it cut to where, you know, you get into the jacket. See how that seam is nice and thick, and then it starts touching the jacket a little bit there. You want to watch that, guys. You got to be super anal careful, super particular, because if you get that jacket thin and it rubs on a frame rail or something metal somewhere, you're going to have a short. You're going to start popping fuses and causing fires. So if you're going to cheap out like I did and buy an extension jumper cable to get your 4-gauge wire, okay, do it, but be very careful about how you split. Don't just peel it apart by hand and rip it apart and have all kind of exposed wire and junk. That defeats the purpose of being careful, okay? So I also bought a bunch of jacket insulation, you know, the coily black stuff to put around it to protect it. I only needed 2 of these, but I went ahead and picked up a 3rd one just in case I need a screw or hardware or whatever, just to have a spare. But I put these in the van, I put them in the F650, and now I'm going to put them in the Toyota. They're really, really good quality high amperage gauges. I test the system on the 40 amperes, drive around with full batteries, make sure everything works, and then once I know everything's good and the system's trustworthy, then and I start draining house batteries down real low, and there's high amp draws because they start charging back up from being so low, and they start getting high currents across those cables, then I go to that 80 amp fuse. But you need 2 of those. You don't need 3. I just did a 3rd one for a spare. I got some solder to solder that cable into these end lugs. I forgot which size was on my battery, so I bought 2 sets of lugs. And then these are just some old 12-volt things I had laying around through the years. These little charging leads like this, battery tender leads, I use them to hook my transponders on the motorcycles. That way if George rides it or I ride it or another rider rides it, we can take our transponder off, put their transponder on, and quick disconnect and stuff at the track. But on the other end of these, you know, you're left with these good connectors, you know, and good sockets. And I just had these laying around through the years. So this is a little charging port. We're going to have an inverter, a proper 110 volt inverter in the front of the camper to plug in this laptop setup, okay? So when I need to plug in the laptop and charge the phones, there'll be all that in the front of the camper. But in the back of the camper by the door, we're going to put this little dude, because this way, if I'm at the track working, the Wera transponder that I run charges off of one of these sockets, a style that's built like that. So I wanted one of these in the back. I could have cut the wires off and made it a different system, but it's already all done, so this was convenient. This was $9. So I put this, I'm going to put this in the back by the door, and then also there's going to be USBs for charging things like this camera that I'm using or my phone. So this is really nothing but just a little secondary charge location hanging out of the back of the truck. The main electrical draw will be, you know, running TVs, laptops, lights, and all that stuff off the inverters in the front up by the batteries. I found a good place for the battery. The fuse, I mean, the battery's going to sit here, and that's the B2 terminal I need to get from. So I found the right lug size to fit that terminal. Okay, it's one of the smaller of the 2 commonly available holes. So then you just take a knife and strip this insulation. You know, a lot of you professionals will say, oh, you're supposed to use proper wire strippers. Well, who's got proper wire strippers at their house for 4 gauge? Sorry. So just cut about that much off with your knife. Okay. And then get it in there. I'm going to actually trim a little more. Look. I'm going to shave a little bit more of that back, and then I'm going to show you how to crimp it and solder it. So I trimmed a little bit more back. See the length here? So we'll have a slight little bit of cord of wiring sticking out when we push it all the way in, and I'll show you why that's important. So you're just crimping this enough to hold it tight so it can't come off, and then you're coming back and soldering it so it's a 100% for sure connection. So I got all my braids folded up in there. Find a piece of steel. They make tools for this. If you want to go buy them, you know. But I've done this 5 or 6 times in my life. I'm not buying a tool for that little bit of use. Okay, so there's my crimp. So I got that terminal crimped on there, and there's just a shiver of wire exposed. The reason that's important is when we heat this up, we want to be able to get solder in there. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, don't mind my crappy old stove here. I haven't cleaned in a while, but you're not going to be able to get enough heat in there to do this with a soldering iron. I know that from experience. So we're going to do it with a stove. Just because you have a stove at home. Get it off at an angle where you can get just the lug hot, and then as the lug heats up, you can feed solder into the joint. This could take a couple minutes. Be patient with it. Don't be pushy. Give it enough time to let this lug really heat up. That's why you'd never do it with a soldering iron as efficiently. put the lug right down in the blue flame, and then feed the solder in from the angle. See, there it goes. It's starting to go. Feeding it into the wire. I don't know if you can see it on the camera. I hope you can, but I'm just feeding the solder into the wire. Trying not to burn my hands. They're still cool enough to hold with my human hand. But if you want to wear gloves doing this, you probably should. See, I got enough solder all around there. There's no chance of that pulling out. Let's get you up by the light. That dimple right there that I made with the chisel is a certain thickness. We've put enough solder in there. We filled that hole. That solder ran down into the fat part down here. And by having solder down in the fat part, it's so thick, it's impossible now for it to pull out. There's no way that that fat part can pull through that little part. And this joint is really solid. So, maybe I seem a little too particular about that. It's because I don't want you to melt your truck down. This will go here. I'll trim the other end out to fit the fuse. And then I'll position it in such a way so that if the wire did pull out of the fuse holder for any not so good reason, that it still wouldn't hit anything and cause a short. And that's the tricky part. If I put it up here, it could fall out of the end. If I put it up here like that, it could fall out of the end and touch down on the frame. I'm thinking about putting it up on the tray. That way if it fell, yeah, let's do that. I'm going to put it up on here because if it falls out, it's going to touch this plastic tray. And plastic is not conducive enough to cause enough of a short to... you can read milliamps through it sometimes if it's thin enough, but it's not going to conduct and cause a fire. So that's the plan. Terminal goes there. The fuse sits on the end of the tray. That battery's thin enough that it ends right about where my finger's at. Okay? So I'll let that fuse live right there. And that way, if the end of that wire comes out, it's just touching the tray. It's not going to go anywhere and hit anything that's a ground. Okay? And how am I cutting this cable? I'm using a Dremel with a good bit. You don't want to use crimpers to cut these big cables. You'll mash them all to pieces. It's not the right way to cut through a cable like this. And you can't use something rough or abrupt like a Sawzall or a saw. So the way you cut through these, let me show you how. You might have a better technique, that's fine, but with the tools I own, that's how I do it here. And then we're going to figure out how much to trim back to fit into that fuse holder. So it looks like about right about where my thumb's at. Okay. Now, if you have a good fit on these fuse ends, you don't have to pre-tin that wire. Okay? You can just put it in and mash it down if it's a tight fit. If it's not a tight fit, guys, you got to tin this to give it something to mash onto. Okay? Let's see how it fits in there. Yeah. That's pretty good. That's pretty good, guys. That fills that hole up pretty good. Because when you push this down with that screw, you don't want any looseness. The other thing, if you're using a wire or a fuse that don't exactly match the diameter, you can tin this up with solder. Make it firm. Give it something you know, to bite onto, and then install it and mash it down. You'll get a better connection. But this, I think is going to be just fine. Now, another little trick I do before I torque this down for the final time, guys, is I wrap that lug with tape. Okay? I didn't do it over there, and I should have. So while I'm here, I'm going to pull that apart, and I'm going to wrap these lugs, because if that bent back just the slightest bit, if somebody reached in there with a tool and bent it back, yeah, it's firm and it shouldn't. But what if it did? This body, the body of the isolator, is ground to the chassis of the truck. See that ground strap? The chassis is ground. This is ground, right? At this point, with those metal screws there. So I'm going to wrap these with tape and make sure that they can't short out. And I'll come back and show you what that looks like when I'm done. Okay, guys, I got all the terminals wrapped like this. See that? They're all wrapped. Now this one has the proper size hole on it. This one's oversized. So should I cut that off and relug it and all that stuff? I could, but I'd have to take the other end of the cable off to take it in the house and get it hot enough to do and all that stuff. What I'm going to do is just put some washers on both sides of that. I'm just going to put some washers on there to take up the space so it's not so, you know, like that. Okay. Leave your studs out a little bit away from the black pot mix. That's just good for insulation. Plus it keeps all the positives away from the ground of the fins, right? Because the fins are screwed to ground, right? I don't think they have to be ground to work. I think all that's done through the potting. But, you know, they're screwed to the chassis, so you don't want that. So you want to pull your base nuts out a little bit to keep the terminals from being near ground. Okay. And I'm going to go find a couple of washers that fit that size. Okay, so I'm going to mount this fuse here because the battery end's right about where my finger's at. Okay. And it's going to be inboard of it. Okay. But if anything pulls, or if this little set screw or anything comes apart, or if that cable comes out of that end, where's it going to go? It's just going to lay on that plastic. It's not going to cause a problem. And then when we see our battery in the house draining down and not recovering, we'll know something's wrong with the system and we'll figure it out. It'll be just like a blown fuse. But the point is, this can't find and make its way to ground somewhere, which would damage either the isolator, or the isolator and the wire harness, or the isolator and the wire harness and the alternator. So no bueno. So or a fire and melt the whole truck down. No bueno. So we got this wire in such a place that if anything goes wrong, it's just going to lay and sit and live right there and not start a fire. Alright, now this little cheap little screw they give you is okay for plastic. If you're going to mount this to metal or something, you know, I would use a better self-tapping screw, something like this, you know, depending on the length and where you're putting it and everything. The reason I'm not using this screw here is because there's other stuff underneath of that plastic tray. So I'm going to go ahead and use the supplied screw that came in the kit. And I'm just going to tack a real tiny little pilot hole with this tiny little drill bit right there. Alright, so we've got the front face of the feed done. Now I'm going to do the hard work of figuring out where I'm going to run this cable and how I'm going to get it in the back of the truck. Okay, so I got my inverter running off the 12 volts. These are little clamps they give you with the inverter. I'm going to do away with those. I just put them on there to get this light turned on, so I had some light inside here in the garage. It's dark in here. Got that light at Salvation Army for like, I think it was $3. But these will get wired into a fused rig runner. Okay. See how there's no fuse between that clamp and this inverter? That's bad. You can't run stuff like that, guys. You can't rely on these things. That's junk. That's just what came in the Walmart package or the auto store or wherever I bought it from. But you can't do that. So I'm going to get these cables fused and properly set up. But I just did it for now until I'm done, so I have light. and I'm sitting right here with it, so if anything happens. But I'm gonna put that fuse right where my finger's at, and I'll tell you why. The reason I'm gonna put it back there on that piece of wood is because I can run the positive cable right over top of these handles and electric tape it all together, so that if the end of that wire came out by that fuse, there's no way it could touch the frame of the truck and get grounded. Okay? It couldn't even make it to the ground side of the batteries the way I'm going to tape it. So you cannot let a cable that is coming directly off of a hot get anywhere near ground. See how I've got these cables on this side of the handle, and I've got those cables on that side of the handle, so that they cannot touch each other, because fuses won't work upstream of the fuse holder. They only work downstream of the fuse holder. So the wire that goes straight from the battery to the fuse holder is unprotected wire. So if I put the fuse here where my finger's at, and the wire comes out of the back of it and falls down and hits that negative terminal, we got a problem. We got a huge problem. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to prevent that. Okay? I'm going to get this panel removed and get all this stuff moved out of there so I can get back in there and work. The other thing we need to do is we need to figure out how to get into that little plastic access location back there to get the wire run up into the truck. I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so that black plug down, okay, I'm sorry, can't see what I'm doing here. That black plug right there is where I'm going to run the wire up through. I could drill a hole right down through the floor and super insulate it and protect it, but I'm just going to use that hole that's already provided. It's in a convenient place. So this little insert goes into the front of the cab, okay? It goes in, or the front of the camper area, all right, on the other side. There's one also on the floor, but I covered it with the plywood. These little vent holes are literally for ventilation and to let water drain out in the back of the truck if the back of the truck's open, okay? But I'm going to use this, now that everything's sealed up and dry, I'm going to use this to run those cables. So what do we need? We need a hot cable to go from the house battery through a fuse all the way up to this fuse to get charged. Why do we have a fuse on both ends? Because anywhere in that run of cable, you could have a short. And you have batteries on both ends. You have the house batteries in the back. A lot of guys called me and talked about this before, you know, doing this at the track, different people. And they said, well, Q, you only need one battery back by the house batteries. No. That isolator is putting out over 14 volts. Okay? That isolator is connected through diodes to the alternator output. You cannot short that out or you'll damage your truck so bad it'll leave you stranded somewhere. You need a fuse on the front coming off the alternator with the unfused portion of the cable absolutely impossibly not able to touch ground, which is why I designed that just the way I did, okay? And then in the back, you need the same thing. So we're going to have the hot that comes up off the battery, you know, go into a fuse in the back, and I'll show you, I'll do the same thing. But how do I get this cable all the way up to the front? I'm going to go through this portal, through this little thing here. Now, the other thing I did was I cut the other side of this. I told you instead of buying 4-gauge wire, I just bought a set of 4-gauge jumper cables. It was cheaper. So I cut one of those other ends off. So now I've got ground 4-gauge. Why did I do that? Electronics and batteries, electronics and cell phones and stuff, if I just tapped in to the ground back here, it would be fine. It really would. It would work great. But if I ever put a bigger inverter back there and run power tools, which I did do in the van, I found a need for that in my other vehicle, and I might have to do that with this one too someday. You can't have some dinky little ground that's about this size. Okay, that dinky little ground that's that size is going to be good for cell phones and laptops. It's not going to be good for heavy draws like power tools and starters. And look at this is proof positive engineering wise of what I'm saying. This is the ground that Toyota built. Look how big it is to the chassis, and look how big it is going down to the engine block, because that's where the starter load goes through. Okay, the ground from the body is next to nothing. The ground to the starter is huge. So what am I going to do if I want to run big heavy equipment off the back of my house batteries? Okay, there's only 2 house batteries, so you can't run big heavy equipment for a long period of time. But for a few minutes, if I got to drill a hole or something or run a saw, so I'm going to run this negative cable from the house battery straight to the frame of the truck. Straight to the frame, okay? And if this rusted old Toyota, because it looks nice on the outside, that's why I bought it, but it's rusted underneath. If that rusted frame is not well grounded, which it should be, I'll run additional grounds from the frame back up to the battery, and I'll do that. I'll make the ground better. But for now, to get the battery system working, I'm going to run this heavy, thick 4-gauge ground right alongside the feed, and they're going to go through this. Okay, I'm literally going to drill a hole in that. They're going to go through that, and this plastic edge on this device is going to protect these cables from chafing on the sheet metal that is in the back of the truck. So I'm going to use this like a grommet, and I'll tape the living hell out of it too, like I'll show you. And one of these is going to go to the house battery, and the other is going to connect the ground from the house battery to the frame. Okay, it's a dual ground system, so both the house battery and the starter battery are both grounded to the same ground. Now, you say, well, it's not safe to run these wires next to each other, Q, because you just talked about how dangerous it is to have 12 volts shorting out on ground. You're right. It is horribly dangerous. So that's why 2 rules must apply. There are 2 things I'm going to do to make it safe. One, I'm going to insulate the living heck out of it with this, which is exactly how the motorcycle manufacturers do their 12 volt hots right next to ground. They got their 12 volt cables right next to their ground cables too. I've seen every manufacturer do it. I've seen car and truck manufacturers do it. But they use this stuff, okay? That's their version of that. See that big thick insulator, okay? And then the other thing I'm going to do is make sure that it only happens downstream of the fuse. So the wire from the battery to the fuse is nowhere near ground of any kind. The wires that come and run up to the front of the truck or to the frame of the truck that are close together, they will be post-fuse. They are post-fuse, people. So if they rub together for thousands of years and millions of miles and actually start touching each other through that insulator protector, and that were to happen, it'll pop the fuse in the front, okay, and it'll pop the fuse in the cab, or in the camper. Both ends will die. And that whole section of 12 volt hot wire will go down and go cold, okay? And then my battery will stop charging, and I'll use it and wear it down, and it'll be dead. And I'll say, why is my battery dead? Why is it not charging? Something must be wrong with the charging system. Oh, both fuses are blown. Oh, I must have a short. Oh, there's my short. My wires touched each other. So I'm guessing it'll take 30 years of operation before these wires ever short against each other like that. But so this is how the professionals run hots and colds together. They do it with insulation, serious thick protection like that, and they do it post-fuse, not between the fuse and the battery, but after the fuse, away from the battery. That way, if there's a short, it kills the fuse and shuts the system down. All right, I'm going to stop rambling and preaching. I'm going to start drilling holes, running this insulation together. This protectant will only go over the red. It doesn't need to go over the black, because this is ground. If it scrapes on a frame, I'm bolting it to the frame anyway. So I'm going to put the protector on the hot side, get this all wound up and loomed, and ran through this thing here, grommeted on both sides, and ready to push it up through the floor, and I'll come back. Hope you don't miss me. Okay guys, when you buy this protective stuff, make sure you get the stuff that's already split to see where that split there on the end. See where that split to get the cable into it. When I bought this in the package, it was not split. It was a pain. So what I did was I put them in the oven for about 300 degrees for about 15-20 minutes. Got them good and warm. And then I went back with an RC car X-Acto knife, just an X-Acto hobby style knife. And I cut like this. Yeah. And I did that with an RC knife for about a half an hour. It took me a half an hour to get through these things. That's why I warmed them up. So you can buy this already split. I made the mistake of not doing that. So make sure you buy this already split. All right, let me show you how to get the wire in it. And you just do that all the way down. It's a pain. I'll see you in a few minutes. Guys, what I got here is 18 feet of the protectant along a 20-foot section of this 4-gauge wire that was cut out of some jumper cables. Here's the negative side that I'll save and use for later. I took a little bit of that red piece off there. I guess if you wanted to be super professional, you would take some of that black and put it there. Okay, you know, it's all hard bolted there and physically can't move, and it's on plastic, so I'm not going to bother. But if that's what you want to do, that's cool. Criticize me, whatnot. I'm going to take and wrap these ends where they join. Not so much that I'm worried about that's going to be the one spot in life where it's going to rub something. It's more so that when I'm pulling the cable and handling it and pulling it up over frame rails and around the truck, these things stay where they need to be. So I'm going to tape these two joints together because I got 3 6-foot pieces there for 18 feet total. So I'm going to tape these together, and then I'm going to loom some negative cable into one end of it for the house battery to ground, and then I'm going to get that through this piece and get that back in the truck. Okay guys, I used that little abrasive tip to trim that plastic out in the shape of that cable. It doesn't have to be perfectly waterproof, you know, there's vent holes anyway, it's not a big deal. Rainwater and salt and spray is going to get all up under the bottom of these wires anyway, and that's why, another reason I put the jacket on it. But I wanted to show you how I loomed it. The positive cable is there. It just has electric tape on it to hold the sheathing when I pull it up through the back of the truck. Then the negative cable's there, and then I pull it through. It's going to be more like this. Okay. That's about the length, give or take, that's going to go up to the batteries. Then I'll trim them out and make them short and make sure the side that's pre-fused on the hot can't touch anything, and I'll do all that, blah, blah. And then this is what's going to come out of the bottom of the truck. This is going to go ground to the frame. I cut that ground wire too long. I didn't need it nearly that long, but that's okay, whatever. And then the rest of it's going to go up to the front of the truck. And this rubber piece right here, plasticky piece right here, is going to go back in the bed. So I got to feed the wire up through the floor first and then push the plastic down on it because it's flanged from that direction. So I'm going to put this in first, you know, or go inside the truck first with this, and then try to feed the cable up through it. You know, it's going to be tough getting the cable up through there, but that's another reason I taped it all like that, to give it a firm handle to work it. So, all right, next step, get this up into the bed of the truck. So now I'm ready to set this positive up to where my fuse is going to go. And I'm ready to hook this down onto the ground of the battery. It's going to sit basically like that. Guys, I didn't just tape the hot one up there so it can't fall down and hit stuff. I taped both of them together in the loom to that leg so that it's crunched up in such a way that it can't try to make its way to metal and ground out. And it's, you know, if something under the truck or some body or whatever, we're pulling on that wire, it's going to have some support there. So I taped the hot alone up there, and then both of them down here, and they're taped together along the way. So really nothing should move out of place there. You know. Okay, I got my ground hooked up inside the camper, and I've got the hot cable connected to the fuse, but I'm not going to connect the fuse to the battery to the very, very end. So, you know, after everything's in place and inspected. So now comes the fun part of looking under the truck about how we're going to, and considering how we're going to run this cable. So we know we need to get to this fuse. Do we want to run down the left side and across drive shafts and all that stuff? Do we want to run straight up the right side and then up into the engine bay and across? You know, it would probably be neat and trim to go across the back where all those other brackets and stuff are. That way we have stuff to attach to. There's a number of ways we could do this, but all basic mechanic stuff applies, guys. You don't want this cord to hit anything that moves, like a control arm or a drive shaft. You don't want it to hit anything that's hot, like a header or a pipe. Nothing that can melt it or damage it. Okay, you want it to have a nice, safe place to live. I think our length is pretty good. That's the length coming out of the bottom of the truck. And we basically got to snake it over and get it up to there. Where it's going up in there, see that? The ground is coming down. I'm going to attach that to the frame. There's the hot. I ran that hot through that hole on the frame. I don't like those sharp edges, but, you know, that's what the protection's for. You can't go crazy. I'm not going to spend 3 days rounding everything off. So, but the reason I went through that hole is because it keeps it away from the muffler. Okay, it'll get warm there, but it won't be bad. And then, because most of the heat's in the front of the exhaust, not the rear, and we're all the way in the back of the truck. So then I ran the cable through these brackets, picked a couple of places to zip tie it, just to give it some front and back longitudinal pull, you know. Went around this section of the frame, again, securing it with a zip tie to keep it back and away from the muffler, okay? And then up under the body, up to the front. So that's how I ran it under the truck. I just came up the right frame rail and zip tied it in a few places just to keep it from hitting anything or getting hot. And then up in the cab, I could have crossed over sooner. What I mean by that is I could have taken it up there where my finger's at, but I didn't want it hitting that header down there. So I came up all the way on the other side of the heater core, okay? And again, it'll get a little bit warm there, you know, but it ain't gonna hurt it. And I ran it along the back. I would have liked to have had enough to tuck this in down there. I just don't like the way it looks flopping up in the corner like this. But I ran out of cable. That is literally the end of the cable. That is the end right there. So remember I told you I was going to do something to make sure that this can't hit the frame if it pops out of the fuse holder. This side is post fuse. Okay? On both ends. It's post fuse on this end and post fuse in the back. If this end pulls out and touches the frame, it can't get 12 volts from there anyway. It will still have it from the back, but that's where the back fuse will pop. So I'm not as concerned about this shorting out. The main one that can never short out, guys, cannot happen, is this one. You cannot let that short out, okay? You have big problems if you do that. But I got my protector all the way around. I used a couple of these little rubber coated clamps ran the wire back between the fuse, so that way, you know, we got access to our fuses if we need to work on stuff on the side of the road. You know, it's 3 in the morning at a truck stop somewhere and you're trying to get something done. Yeah, so basically just zip tied it along the way. It's not near any hot stuff. You know, it's near hot stuff. It's touching a heater core insulator pad, but it's not touching anything exhaust hot on a header. And it's not touching anything moving. So I'm going to go ahead and crawl back under the truck one more time. I probably don't need to put this on film. It's not a big deal. I'm going to find a place on the frame that's easy to run a bolt through. You know, like a pre-drilled hole. And I'm just going to scrape all the paint off of it with the Dremel. Get or a sander or something, whatever fits up in there best. And I'm going to get the paint off the frame, get the rust off the frame, get a nice shiny spot of steel, and then I'm going to bolt one of these lugs right to that shiny spot of steel with a bolt going through it, okay? And the other end of that ground cable here. So I'm going to have to solder it with a torch. I won't be able to take it in the house and solder it because I'm retarded and I didn't prearrange the length and take this in the house and solder it when I soldered the positive one. So what I'm going to have to do is get the length figured out, take the punch and the hammer, and you know, just like I did this up here on this piece of metal, like that, to you know, kink it in there. I'm going to just do that right on the frame of the truck. I'll just take the hammer and the chisel, lay this up on the frame of the truck, and wham, do that. I won't be able to hold the camera and show you that, but I'll just kink that right on the frame of the truck, and then bolt it to the frame of the truck, and then I'll heat it with a propane torch and feed solder down into it so it's a good connection. Alright, when I come back and you see me on camera next, what we'll do is throw the fuses in it. Gotta turn my flashlight off. We'll throw the fuses in it and throw a voltmeter on it, and I'll show you that when the engine's running, it's charging in the back. Alright guys. Okay guys, I wanted to show you the ground. It's just basically a ground strap is all it is. I hope you can see that in the camera. I didn't wrap that in tape and take all that care with that terminal because it's ground. It's metal to metal. That's what you want. You want a good contact to that. I drilled a hole the size of the lug. I think it's 3/8. I'm not sure, but I took a drill bit that was the exact same size as the lug and drilled a nice clean hole through the frame. And then I took the Dremel and I knocked all the rust off. Just knocked it all off there, made it nice and clean on both sides. I did it on both sides. A lot of you guys will just do one side and call it a day. No, get all the paint off on both sides. Get this light over here, I'll show you what I did. See how I did it on that side too? So that way the bolt is jammed up against that clean metal. Now, yes, it's going to rust all around that. Of course it is. You could go back and spray paint it if you wanted it, if you cared. But the point is to have good metal contact on both sides of that joint. When it comes to a good ground, guys, you cannot have a good enough ground. You just can't. One of the main things all the factory tech lines will tell you technicians as you call in and have problems is, did you check the ground? Did you check the ground? They say it over 50,000 times. Did you check the ground? Because they get rusty and dirty and they lose connection and they can't carry the amp load and you start having problems. So if I put a big inverter back there in the camper and fire it up to run a power tool or something, you know, or a toaster or something crazy that draws a lot of power, I want a good connection under there to transfer that voltage. So guys, look at how I'm doing this positive that's pre-fuse. This is the dangerous one, guys. Sorry it's not red. I ran out of red cable, so I used black. But this is the dangerous one, guys. You cannot let this over near that negative. Okay? You cannot let it touch the body of the truck. Okay? I've got this cut at a certain length so that it cannot get anywhere to where it could short out if it popped out of that fuse holder. Okay. Now, in addition to that, the other thing I'm going to do is tape it to the handle. I'm going to tape it right there. So it's extra special, super duper not able to do that. Why am I taking so much care? It's that important, guys. Everything from here down is fused, but everything between here and here is not fused, and you will melt your truck to the ground. So, all right, guys, I'm going to get this attached, and then we'll throw some fuses in there. Here's my ground cable between the two batteries. I'm not too worried about it rubbing the body because it's ground, right? It's already bolted on the other side to the chassis, so that can rub and wear through. I don't care, whatever. This positive cable here has got to be protected. Notice I've got it away from the body. I turned the batteries around so that this cannot get near the body. All right? So this positive cable is protected, and everything pre-fuse is protected. And then I'm going to tape everything down, and there you go. Be careful, guys. Okay, so we've got the back all hooked up. I put the fuse in the back. I'm using the 40s, not the 80s, just for testing, because if something's going to pop, I want it to do it quick. So we've got my good voltmeter is at work, so I'm going to use this little power probe. To use this tool to test voltage up here, you can go to any ground, any known good ground. I hope that's good because that's what hooks the battery. And then we can put it on the terminal that's fused to the back. Okay. Now technically this tool might get a reading even all the way over here. No, it's not. Okay. So until that coil is energized with 12 volts, these two terminals aren't charging. So how much voltage do we have in the back minus the voltage drop? We got 12.7. I'm surprised to see that much. I was expecting 12.4 or 12.2 because I've been running lights off of those two batteries for a while. I charged the cell phone off of those two batteries twice for about a half hour apiece, and then I also plugged in lights for like 2 hours, and we're still sitting at 12.6. It initially said 12. Yep, 12.6, 12.7. And that's after the voltage loss of the circuit. So those batteries are still brand new and fresh and not run down yet at all, hardly. They're in good shape, brand new. So we know we've got hot all the way up to here from the house battery. Now once we put the starter battery in and fire the thing up, the alternator is going to exceed 12.7 in its output, and it'll start driving voltage back into the house battery. That's what I want to see. But our fuses didn't blow, so we don't have any shorts along the way. So the condition of the charging system is sound. We got a good connection from here to the house batteries. Good ground. I soldered the ground strap. I soldered the terminal on the positive that back there on the battery. Everything's really tight. Any of the lugs were mashed and soldered, and any of the connections were well made and tightened up and torqued and triple checked. So if this screw were to back out and fall down and short one of these to the other, they're both positive anyway, but if it was to short one of them to negative, then we'd blow a fuse, right? So alright guys, I've made it as safe as I can be, been as careful as I could be. That battery ends right here in the tray. So I thought I was going to get away with using the stock hole for the hold down. The other day in the other video, or maybe depending how I edited it earlier in this video, I had said I was going to get away with leaving that there, but that is not the case. After driving it for a few days and then looking at it again, it kind of wiggled. I'm going to move this hole over here and drill a new hole and put a nut under it. Thankfully, I can get to it underneath there. It's not, you know, captured or hidden. But if it was, I'd have to weld a nut onto the top of this. But yeah, I can get a bolt in there and torque that down because I got to move the battery over to this edge of the tray and keep it away from... It's not so much the fuse that I was worried about. I could have put that up somewhere else. The main thing was keeping the battery away from those studs. I didn't want those studs to wear through the plastic casing of the battery and have a real mess. Oh, that would be a nasty mess. So, all right, let me get that remounted, get this hole drilled, get it secured, and then hook it up, fire the truck up, and we'll take the power probe into the and see that it's charging. Okay, guys, I got the battery back in. I padded these bars a little bit. There was a little bit of a twist induced into that bracket when I moved it over. But now I've got the space. I don't know if you can see that in the lighting. I've got the space to put that fuse in there. And that'll keep the battery from sliding left towards the isolator. So the battery should stay put and everything should be fine. I got it good and taut. And this ground wire is running behind the strap, and that zip tie there, that zip tie reaches down and pulls the alternator cable up and away from the chassis. Notice I put a rubber tube around this battery hold down piece, you know, a piece of all thread. I put a rubber tube around that just to prevent any kind of shorts, because that cable there is a live alternator hot cable. So, and that hook is going into the metal chassis, so I didn't want any grounding happening there. So this zip tie can't slide off because the hook sticks up past it, and the battery can't move because it's nice and tight in all directions. And I got it out on the edge of the tray now. It used to sit all the way left towards the fender, and this was empty space. But I've got the battery pushed towards the passenger side of the vehicle now, and that left me room for the fuse and the isolator. So, all right now, there's our ground test. Power probe lit up green, ground, red on hot, 12.5. We got 12.5 in the starting battery. We're going to have 12.5 here. That's battery 1. The alternator is 12.1. There's voltage drop back through the alternator circuit because the vehicle's not running. The sensor should be a battery, which is 12.5, and this should be down in the 11s. Oh no, that's right, it's higher now. The other day when we did this test, there was a lot of voltage drop through the isolator, and this was down in the 11s. Now you see it's up at 12.7. Why is it at 12.7? Because I got the fuses in there, and it's connected back to the house battery. So the starting battery is at 12.5, and the house battery is already higher at 12.7. So what is the isolator going to do? It's going to, the voltage meter built into the isolator is going to throw voltage at the starting battery and make sure the starting battery is charging. Is it going to throw all the voltage at the starting battery? I don't know. I doubt it, but probably most of it. If it throws it all there, then what will happen is all the voltage will go to the starting battery till it's back up to about 12.6, and then voltage will start kicking back to the house battery. But since both batteries are pretty high and functional, 12.4 will start your vehicle. 12.2 is getting iffy. 12.0 is bad. So because both vehicles are 12.5 and up, it might just start charging them both. So let's go ahead and fire up. Alright, I got no charging light warnings, right? Everything's good there. It charges on the dash, typically where it normally would. Can't run the vehicle long, I'm in an enclosed garage. So, alright, we're at 14.3 on the starting battery. Let's see what's going back. So we're at 14.3 on the starting battery. The alternator's putting out probably about 15. Yeah, 15.1. So let's see where battery 2's at. Yeah, it's also charging at 14.3. So what it's doing is it's recognizing that both batteries are at an acceptable level, and it's splitting the charge between both of them. Okay? The way these isolators work, if your starting battery, let me turn this thing off because I'm in an enclosed garage here. If your starting battery is really low because you left the lights on in the cab of the truck and the camper batteries are fine, what it'll do is it'll throw most of the voltage at the starting battery. Okay? When the starting battery is recovered and good, which it normally should be anyway, then it starts throwing voltage back towards that camper battery. When I go to the racetrack on a Thursday night and I get there, the camper batteries, everything's fully charged because I've been driving for hours. The closest track to me is about a half hour away, but most of the tracks I go to are 2, 3, 5, 8, 9, 10, 12 hours away. So after hours of driving to the racetrack, every battery in the rig is fully charged. Then I turn the key off and park for the weekend. Well, the isolator keeps this battery out of the loop, and only the house batteries will drain when I'm, running laptops, TVs, lights, and whatnots, televisions, cell phone chargers, inverters. All that runs off those two batteries in the back. This stays fully charged and safe to get me started up and out of there. So then, the end of the weekend, that battery's down to 12.0. This is still up at 12.5 or 6. So I fire the vehicle up, drive home, and the whole way home, now it's charging them both. Okay? So I tested the charging system on the 40 amp fuses. I'm going to do that for a while. I'm going to do that for probably through the winter till we get to the spring season. I'll run some light loads off the camper in the back, just playing with it in the winter time. Maybe when I go down to my family's place for Christmas, I'll run a TV or something in the back and, be on the road for a few days with the truck. But I'm going to do all that on these 40 amp fuses. I'm not going to put these big 80s in until springtime when I really start pulling those house batteries down. When I start beating those house batteries up and using them and really depleting them down, I'm going to put the 80 amp fuses in, and here's why. Right now, we tinkered around with those batteries, and they were still at 12.6, 12.7, right? We didn't hardly use them at all, so we're just topping them off when we fire the vehicle up and drive it. If I run those batteries down to 12.0 or worse, 11.8, if something goes wrong, if I fall asleep with something and with a light on and the inverter doesn't I've got self cutoff protection built into the rig runners that I'll use. That's another video for another day. But if that thing gets below 12 volts, which is not good for them, when I fire the Toyota up and it's already got a high starting battery, most of that voltage will go straight to the back. It'll go straight back there and try to recover those batteries. And it'll throw some amps. And I think it'll throw more than 40. And I think it'll pop those fuses. It's a 90 amp unit, So the alternator puts out over 100. So the alternator puts out more than that isolator can handle. And you say, well, why would you do that? How is that safe? Well, because I got 80 amp fuses in the circuit. So if there's a serious problem and the batteries are that dead that alternator is pumping out that kind of power to recover them, it'll pop that fuse before it burns up either the isolator or the alternator.